Can you hear them? The deep thundering of war drums rolling across the Yoruba forests, their echoes bouncing through the hills, warning of fire, blood, and destruction. This was not the call of celebration, nor the music of harvest festivals. No, these were the drums of Owu, calling its people to a war that would burn for nearly a decade and leave an entire kingdom in ashes. The Owu kingdom stood proud in the heart of Yorubaland. Its capital, Owu Ipole, near present-day Abeokuta, was a thriving city of trade, wealth, and courage. Owu was respected for its warriors, its skill in crafts, and its prosperity in commerce. Palm oil, kola nuts, and woven cloth flowed through its markets. To outsiders, the Owu people seemed untouchable, protected by their walls, their warriors, and their pride. But beneath the surface, storm clouds were gathering. The Yoruba world in the early 19th century was not a land of peace. The great Oyo Empire, once the supreme power, was weakening its authority, crumbling under internal strife and external pressures. As Oyo declined, rival city-states like Ife, Ijebu, and Ibadan rose with ambition. Trade routes became battlegrounds, alliances became fragile, and jealousy festered like an open wound. Owu's prosperity painted a target on its back. But what could possibly drive brother to raise a sword against brother? Why did Yoruba sons, who shared blood, culture, and gods, turn their spears upon one another? Historians point to trade disputes as the spark. The Owis, wealthy in their control of kola nut trade routes from the north, were accused of arrogance and hostility toward neighboring tribes. Some say they raided markets in Apomu, a trading center tied to Ife. Others argue that Owu refused to pay tribute to certain powers. Whatever the truth, resentment boiled. The Ijebu, masters of commerce along the southern trade lines, saw Owu as a rival. Ife, the spiritual heart of the Yoruba, felt slighted by Owu's growing arrogance. And Ibadan, a rising military power hungry for expansion, saw opportunity in war. By the year 1821, these tensions erupted. The drums of war began to sound not in one town, but across the Yoruba world. From the sacred groves of Ife, to the busy markets of Ijebu, to the rugged hills of Ibadan, war councils gathered, alliances were forged, and armies began to march. Picture it, the warriors of Ijebu sharpening their spears and Dane guns, their chiefs swearing oaths before Ogun, god of iron. In Ife, the priests blessed war banners, calling on Orunmila to guide their cause. And in Ibadan, a city of soldiers, men beat their chests and vowed to carve their destiny through blood. Against this storm, Owu stood alone. But Owu was not weak. Their warriors were fierce, their leaders bold. Oral traditions tell us that when the first raid struck, Owu responded with fire and fury, raiding enemy outposts, burning villages, and capturing prisoners. The Owis believed the gods were on their side. They believed their walls could withstand anything. Yet, pride is often the prelude to downfall, and so it began the Owu War. What started as small raids would soon grow into sieges, starvation, betrayal, and the total collapse of one of Yorubaland's proudest kingdoms. The people could not yet see the scale of what was coming. Mothers sang war songs to encourage their sons. Drummers beat rhythms of defiance in the town squares. Elders told the young warriors, "Owu is strong. Owu will never fall." But history tells a different story. For 8 long years, the fire of this war would rage. Cities would burn, families would scatter, and Yorubaland would never be the same. The Owu kingdom was about to be tested not just in battle, but in survival itself. The drums of Owu had sounded, and once the drums of war are beaten, they do not stop until kingdoms fall. War is never just about armies, it is about families. In the Owu War, the tragedy was not only that cities burned, but that brothers turned against brothers, and tribes who once traded and married together suddenly saw each other as enemies. This war was not fought against strangers, it was fought within the Yoruba family itself. The Owu people had long stood as proud traders and warriors. Their city, Owu Ipole, bustled with markets where goods from the north and south met. Hausa merchants brought leather and horses. The Owis traded palm oil, cloth, and kola nuts. Their prosperity made them admired and envied. When tensions with Apamu Ife and Ijebu first flared, Many thought the conflict would be brief, perhaps a raid or two, some captured cattle, maybe a market burned, and then peace. After all, this was the Yoruba way. Conflicts came and went, but kinship endured. But this war was different. The moment alliances were forged against Owu, the war became bigger than anyone could imagine. The Ife kingdom, proud spiritual heart of Yorubaland, declared Owu arrogant. Their priests proclaimed the war just, saying the gods had abandoned Owu's pride. The Ijebu kingdom, skilled traders along the southern coast, saw opportunity. If Owu fell, they could dominate trade routes without challenge. Their warriors, armed with muskets purchased through European trade, joined the fight eagerly. And then came Ibadan, the rising city of warriors. Founded only decades earlier, Ibadan was a military camp turned city, full of ambitious soldiers seeking glory. For them, the war was not about trade or pride, it was about carving their place in Yoruba destiny. One by one, these powers closed in. The Yoruba world was eating itself alive, and Owu was at the center of the feast. Imagine the sight. Warriors from Ijebu marching with red-dyed cloth, their muskets glinting in the sun. Ife warriors chanting sacred verses, their priests raising charms for protection. Ibadan soldiers pounding their shields, promising to bring down Owu. Each night before battle, the forests echoed with the calls of hunters and war songs of men preparing to kill their own kin. The Owus, surrounded, had no choice but to fight. And so the Yoruba family, once united under common ancestors, became locked in a war that would leave wounds stretching far beyond the battlefield. The first clashes were brutal. Owu warriors met Ijebu raiding parties in ambushes along the forest paths, cutting them down with spears and machetes. For a time, Owu held its ground. Their warriors were disciplined, their city fortified, and their people brave. But the enemies were many. Oral tradition tells us that when Owu captured warriors from Ife or Ijebu, they did not release them. The prisoners were executed, their bodies displayed as warnings. This brutality hardened the hearts of their enemies even further. The war was no longer about trade, it became a war of vengeance, fueled by anger and blood. Brother against brother, tribe against tribe. This was no longer just politics. It was a family tearing itself apart. Families who once intermarried now faced each other on the battlefield. A mother from Ife might have a sister married into Owu. Yet, when armies marched, kinship ties meant nothing. Spears clashed, muskets fired, and Yoruba sons slaughtered Yoruba sons. The Owu elders warned that this path would end in destruction for all, but the war spirit had already consumed Yorubaland. As months turned into years, the alliance tightened its grip. Owu fought valiantly, but with every battle, their strength was drained. The city was becoming an island surrounded by fire. The question was no longer if Owu could win, but how long Owu could survive. And so, the Owu War marched into its darkest chapters. The walls still stood. The warriors still fought. But outside the gates, three great powers were united, and they would not rest until Owu was brought to its knees. There are moments in history when a city does not simply fall, it is erased. The fall of Owu was one such moment. For 8 long years, the proud people of Owu resisted siege, betrayal, and starvation. But when the walls finally crumbled, what followed was not just defeat, it was annihilation. The war that began as a quarrel over trade routes had now stretched into nearly a decade of bloodshed. Owu Ipole, once a city of laughter, trade, and music, was transformed into a fortress of hunger and despair. The alliance of Ife, Ijebu, and Ibadan tightened its grip year after year. The Owus had fought fiercely, even launching counterattacks that burned villages and scattered enemy raiders. But the pressure was relentless. Supplies dwindled. Farmlands around the city were destroyed. Merchants could no longer bring food or weapons through the siege lines. Families inside Owu began eating whatever they could find. Roots, leaves, even animal skins boiled into bitter soup. Mothers quieted their crying children not with food, but with empty promises. Warriors grew thin, their strength drained not by battle, but by hunger. And still, they fought on. The alliance, frustrated by Owu's stubborn resistance, decided on a final plan. They would break the city from within. It was betrayal, not battle, that doomed Owu. According to oral tradition, some informants, either out of fear or survival, revealed the weak points of Owu's defenses. With this knowledge, the Allied armies launched their final assault. The night was thick with smoke as Ijebu musketeers unleashed volleys into the city walls. Ibadan warriors, relentless and disciplined, charged with shields raised, their war cries shaking the air. Ife priests stood behind, chanting, calling on the Orisa to curse Owu's defenders. Inside, the Owu warriors fought like lions. Spears clashed against swords, arrows rained from the walls. Streets ran with blood as neighbors turned their homes into barricades. But numbers cannot be denied, and hunger is the greatest enemy of all. One by one, the Owu defenses collapsed. When the gates finally fell, the enemy poured into the city. What followed was not a battle, it was a slaughter. The Allied forces gave no mercy. Houses were set ablaze. Shrines were desecrated. Families were cut down in the streets. Those who survived the sword were taken as slaves, scattered across Yorubaland and beyond. The proud Owu people, once feared warriors and powerful traders, were erased as a kingdom. Their royal dynasty ended, their city reduced to ashes. Witnesses say that the cries of Owu women and children that night were heard far into the forests, carried on the wind as if the land itself was weeping. The Owu people who survived became wanderers. Some found refuge in Abeokuta decades later, rebuilding their identity as part of the Egba Confederacy. But the memory of their destruction never faded. The fall of Owu was more than the death of a city. It was a scar on Yoruba history, a reminder that unity broken by pride and rivalry can destroy even the strongest among us. The war left Yorubaland weakened. The alliances that destroyed Owu would soon turn on each other, and the cycle of war, Ijaye, Ibadan, Ekiti Parapo, would tear the land apart for generations. But among the Yoruba, the story of Owu is still told not just as a tragedy, but as a warning. Owu stood proud. Owu fought bravely. But Owu fell not to strangers, but to its own brothers. And that is the deepest wound of all. When the fires of war fade, what remains? For Owu, the answer was silence. The proud city, once a beacon of trade and power, lay in ashes. Its walls reduced to rubble, its people scattered like dust on the wind. But history does not end in silence. From ruin came lessons, scars, and legacies that shaped Yorubaland for centuries to come. The destruction of Owu was so complete that survivors could not return to their homeland. Instead, they fled, seeking refuge in neighboring kingdoms, hiding in forests, or living as captives in the households of their conquerors. Some were absorbed into Ife and Ijebu societies, their identities swallowed by assimilation. Others became slaves, sold into faraway lands. But many carried the memory of Owu in their hearts, passing down stories of loss, courage, and betrayal through generations. Decades later, when the Egba settled Abeokuta in 1830, the remnants of Owu found a new home. There, they rebuilt a fragment of their destroyed kingdom, forming the Owu section of Abeokuta, still strong and proud today. What happens when an empire dies not at the hands of strangers, but brothers? The Owu War left Yorubaland deeply fractured. Alliances that had united to crush Owu soon collapsed into rivalry. The Ijebu, Ife, and Ibadan began competing fiercely for dominance. Instead of peace, the fall of Owu opened the gates to an age of endless wars. From the ruins came a cycle of conflicts. The Ijaye War, 1860s. The Kiriji War, 1877. 1893, the longest civil war in Yoruba history. The rise of Ibadan as a military powerhouse. The destruction of Owu had taught one lesson: violence begets violence. Despite their fall, the Owu people carried their identity forward in subtle yet powerful ways. In Abeokuta, the Owu festival still honors their ancestors, retelling the story of survival and resilience. Their history inspired literature, most famously Femi Osofison's play, The Chattering and the Song, which used Owu's tragedy to explore Yoruba disunity. Oral traditions preserved the memory of Owu as a warning that betrayal and disunity among brothers can destroy even the strongest kingdom. The Owu War was not just about trade, or markets, or alliances. It was about pride. It was about envy. It was about the refusal of powerful states to share influence. The lesson is clear. When unity breaks down, destruction follows. Yorubaland, rich with culture, power, and wealth, weakened itself from within. And when the British arrived later in the 19th century, they found a land already bleeding, a land easier to conquer. The Owu people lost their city, but not their spirit. They carried their name into exile, planted it in new soil, and kept their heritage alive. Today, Owu stands as a symbol not just of tragedy, but of resilience. History whispers this lesson. A kingdom can fall in a day, but its memory can endure for centuries. And the fall of Owu is a reminder that our greatest enemy may not come from outside, but from within.